What if I told you that there is a hidden switch in your brain, not metaphorical, not spiritual fluff, but a real neurological gateway that ancient civilizations knew about, modern neuroscience barely whispers about, and almost no one is actively using, and that once activated, it can quiet anxiety, regulate your nervous system, accelerate healing, and unlock a level of calm and clarity that feels almost supernatural. Before you dismiss this, understand this: what you're about to hear was recorded in fragments thousands of years ago, attributed to Thoth himself, buried in lost texts, encoded into the human body, and now, only now, being accidentally rediscovered by science. If you stay until the end of this video, you will never look at your own mind the same way again. And if you value content that connects ancient wisdom, real neuroscience, and practical self-healing without exaggeration or fear tactics, subscribe now, because channels like this don't survive unless people who understand its value choose to support it. Most people believe the brain is a fixed machine, running on habits, genetics, and past trauma, but that belief itself is the first lock. Ancient traditions never described the human mind as static, they described it as dormant. Long before MRI scans and neural mapping, scribes wrote about a silent gate at the back of the mind, a place where the body and consciousness quietly meet. Thoth referred to it not as power, but as balance. Modern humans feel the absence of this balance every day. Racing thoughts, anxiety without cause, exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, emotions that feel hijacked. The nervous system, meant to protect and regulate, becomes overstimulated, stuck in survival mode. What's rarely discussed is that this isn't a flaw, it's a signal. The body is waiting for instruction. Deep in the brainstem, where ancient texts symbolically place the bridge between worlds, lies a neurological control center that regulates breath, heart rate, inflammation, digestion, and emotional response. Neuroscience calls it autonomic regulation. Ancient wisdom called it the return to order. When this system is misaligned, the mind searches endlessly for relief in distractions, medications, or external validation. But when it is activated correctly, the shift feels immediate, like stepping out of noise into silence. This is why some people feel calm during chaos, why certain monks show reduced aging markers, why sudden spontaneous healings, though rare, are always preceded by profound nervous system regulation. The secret was never mystical energy alone. It was the signal that tells the body it is safe enough to heal. The twist most people miss is this: you don't activate this switch by force, you activate it by withdrawing effort. The ancient texts warned repeatedly that those who seek control will never access it. This alone disqualifies modern self-help culture, which is obsessed with effort, discipline, and domination of the mind. Thoth's writings describe a reversal, where awareness moves backward, inward, away from the senses, settling into a point of stillness at the base of the skull. Modern anatomy places the vagus nerve there, the primary communicator between brain and body, influencing inflammation, emotional regulation, and even immune response. Science has proven its importance, yet rarely explains how to consciously engage it beyond breathing techniques. What the ancients understood was subtler. The vagus nerve responds not to technique, but to perception. When perception shifts from threat to safety, the entire nervous system recalibrates. That shift is the hidden switch. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because if this knowledge is real, then anxiety is not a life sentence. It's a miscommunication. Ancient physicians believed that illness began as disharmony in consciousness before appearing in the body. Modern neuroscience surprisingly agrees. Chronic stress reshapes neural pathways, suppresses immune function, and locks the nervous system into high alert. But buried within this system is a reset point, often referred to in Taoist and Egyptian texts as the Feng Fu point. Physically, it sits just below the base of the skull. Neurologically, it connects to brain regions responsible for regulation and awareness. Symbolically, it was described as the gate where heaven enters the body. What Thoth implied, but never stated outright, is that this gate closes when fear becomes the dominant internal signal. The body stops receiving coherent information. Healing slows. The mind fragments. Consciousness contracts. The twist is that healing was never meant to be forced through belief or ritual alone. It was meant to be remembered. When the nervous system receives a coherent signal, one of safety, presence, and non-resistance, it begins to rewire itself automatically. Studies now show that slow sensory withdrawal, combined with specific attentional placement, activates parasympathetic dominance. People report warmth along the spine, sudden emotional release, a quieting of intrusive thoughts. Ancient descriptions mirror this almost word for word, except they framed it as emerald light, a metaphor for balance, not fantasy. Emerald was the color of harmony, not magic. Quantum biology now suggests that cells communicate through electromagnetic signaling, meaning the body is less mechanical than informational. This reframes healing entirely. You are not fixing a broken system, you are correcting a signal. But here is the warning: Thoth, embedded in his teachings. Awakening without grounding leads to imbalance. Many who stumble onto this activation experience emotional flooding, vivid dreams, or a temporary loss of identity. This is why the knowledge was restricted. Consciousness expansion is not the same as peace. The true purpose of this hidden switch is not power, it is coherence. When mind and body communicate without interference, intuition sharpens, anxiety dissolves, and the sense of separation weakens. People describe it as remembering something they never learned. And that is the most unsettling twist of all: the switch was never lost. It was simply ignored, because modern life is built to keep the nervous system distracted, overstimulated, and externally focused. Silence is not profitable. Stillness is not promoted. And yet, within that stillness, the body heals itself. What ancient texts never warned people about directly is that once the nervous system begins to remember safety, the mind starts to resist. This sounds backward, but it is one of the most consistent patterns reported across spiritual awakening, trauma recovery, and deep meditative states. The conscious mind, shaped by years of threat-based conditioning, does not trust calm. Silence feels unfamiliar. Stillness feels dangerous. This is why when the hidden switch begins to activate, people often experience sudden doubt, impatience, or the urge to distract themselves. Thoth described this phase as the echo chamber, a moment when the old signal fights to remain dominant. Neuroscience calls it neural inertia. The brain conserves familiar pathways because they are predictable, even if they are harmful. Anxiety strangely becomes comfortable. When the vagus nerve begins to assert influence, slowing the heart and quieting the amygdala, the mind interprets this loss of urgency as loss of control. This is where many stop. They assume something is wrong. They return to stimulation. They re-enter noise. Ancient initiations were designed specifically to guide people through this threshold, because without guidance, the system snaps back. What makes this moment powerful is that the body has already shifted. Blood pressure begins to regulate. Inflammatory markers drop. Brainwave patterns move from high beta into alpha and theta. This is measurable. The Emerald tablets did not describe brainwaves, but they described the rhythm beneath thought, a cadence that governs perception itself. When this rhythm stabilizes, intuition becomes sharper. not mystical but practical. Decisions feel quieter yet clearer. People report knowing when to stop pushing, when to rest, when to act. This is the mind-body connection operating without interference. The twist is that this clarity is not new information arriving, it is noise disappearing. Consciousness expands not by adding layers, but by subtracting tension. And here is where modern culture unintentionally sabotages the process. Productivity worship, constant urgency, and identity built around stress all reinforce sympathetic dominance. Healing in this framework feels like failure. Thoth warned that civilizations collapse not because they lack knowledge, but because they confuse motion with progress. When the nervous system cannot downshift, wisdom becomes inaccessible. The hidden switch, then, is not a shortcut to enlightenment. It is a return to biological coherence, something every human nervous system was designed to experience but rarely allowed to sustain. At this point in the journey, the question naturally arises, if this switch exists, why isn't it common knowledge? The unsettling answer is that it doesn't scale easily. It cannot be sold as urgency. It cannot be triggered by fear. It does not respond to external authority. The signal that activates the deepest healing mechanisms is internal permission. Thoth's teachings were never commandments, they were observations. He noted that when consciousness stops chasing outcomes, the body reorganizes itself. Modern quantum research hints at something similar, suggesting that biological systems respond to coherence more than force. Cells communicate through frequency, not instruction. When the nervous system emits a coherent signal, the entire organism aligns. This reframes healing frequency not as sound or vibration, but as state. A calm mind is not passive, it is ordered. Anxiety is not intensity, it is fragmentation. The Feng Fu point, long mythologized, is simply where the system recalibrates when perception shifts from threat to presence. Here comes the most important twist, one that ancient teachers hid in symbolism to prevent misuse. Activating the switch does not make life painless, it makes it honest. When the nervous system exits survival mode, suppressed emotions surface. Grief, anger, unresolved memory patterns rise not to punish, but to resolve. This is why so many people mistake awakening for breakdown. Thoth described this phase as the unveiling of weight, where the body releases stored tension through sensation, dreams, or emotional waves. Neuroscience now confirms that trauma is stored somatically, not cognitively. Healing requires the body to complete responses it was once denied. When this happens, the sense of self begins to loosen. People feel less reactive, less defined by old narratives. Consciousness expands not outward but inward. The identity built on fear dissolves quietly. And here lies the real secret. Once the switch stabilizes, healing becomes the default state. The body no longer needs constant intervention. The mind no longer searches endlessly. Calm becomes natural, not forced. This is why the knowledge survived only in fragments. A population that knows how to regulate itself cannot be easily controlled by chaos. What most people never realize is that the nervous system does not respond to belief, intention, or affirmations in the way modern spirituality suggests. It responds to evidence. Evidence of safety, evidence of coherence, evidence that the present moment does not require defense. Thoth's lost teachings emphasize this repeatedly, though the language was symbolic, not instructional. He described the nervous system as a messenger caught between worlds, translating perception into biology. When perception is fractured, the signal becomes distorted. Anxiety, chronic tension, and emotional volatility are not failures of character, they are corrupted transmissions. Modern neuroscience now confirms that the vagus nerve acts as the primary carrier of this signal. constantly scanning internal and external environments for cues of threat or calm. What ancient initiates understood, and what modern people struggle to accept, is that healing begins not with doing, but with allowing the signal to normalize. This is why stillness feels so uncomfortable to those who are chronically anxious. The body has learned that movement equals survival. Silence feels like vulnerability. The twist is that the very discomfort people avoid is evidence that the system is recalibrating. As the parasympathetic state strengthens, the nervous system begins releasing stored charge. Muscles soften. Breath deepens without effort. Thoughts slow not because they are controlled, but because the brain no longer needs to scan for danger. Thoth described this as the mind returning to its rightful rhythm. Modern EEG studies show the same phenomenon. Alpha and theta states emerging naturally when threat perception drops. This is the bridge between ancient wisdom and neuroscience. No mysticism is required to explain it, yet the experience itself feels deeply transformative. What makes this process feel almost supernatural is the way the body begins to self-correct once the signal stabilizes. Inflammation reduces, digestion improves, sleep deepens, emotional reactions lose their compulsive edge. People often report sudden insights, not about the universe but about themselves, clear realizations that feel grounded rather than euphoric. This is consciousness expansion in its most misunderstood form. It is not about leaving the body. It is about fully inhabiting it. Quantum healing, in this context, is not energy manipulation but informational correction. Cells respond to coherence. Systems respond to rhythm. When the nervous system broadcasts calm, the body reorganizes itself around that instruction. The emerald symbolism appears again here, not as color or stone, but as balance, the midpoint between chaos and rigidity. This is why Thoth warned against forcing awakening. Any attempt to dominate the nervous system reinforces the very threat signal that blocks healing. The hidden switch activates only when effort dissolves into awareness. That is the paradox. And it is why this knowledge never spread widely. It cannot be mass-produced, it cannot be rushed. It requires the courage to stop running internally, something modern life actively discourages. By the time the ancient teachings reached their final stage, the emphasis shifted away from healing and toward responsibility. Thoth's writing suggests that once coherence is restored, perception changes permanently. Not dramatically, but subtly. People become less reactive, less suggestible, less driven by fear-based narratives. This is why consciousness expansion was never meant to be public spectacle. A regulated nervous system sees manipulation clearly. Neuroscience confirms this in an unexpected way. Individuals with strong vagal tone show greater emotional resilience, improved decision-making, and reduced susceptibility to stress-based conditioning. This is not spirituality, it is biology. The Feng Fu point, long mythologized as a mystical gateway, functions as a reset node precisely because it sits at the intersection of brainstem regulation and sensory integration. When awareness rests there, the body exits defensive prediction mode. The mind stops projecting threats that do not exist. Reality becomes quieter, sharper, more immediate. This is why people describe a calm mind not as emptiness but as clarity. Anxiety dissolves not because life becomes easier but because perception becomes accurate. Here is the final twist that Thoth encoded in metaphor rather than instruction. Once the switch is activated and stabilized, it cannot be fully undone. The nervous system remembers. Even when stress returns, the body knows the way back. This is why some people, after a single profound moment of regulation, never experience anxiety the same way again. They recognize it as a state, not an identity. Healing becomes a skill, not a miracle. The mind-body connection stops being theory and becomes lived experience. This is the true lost secret, not how to escape reality, but how to meet it without fragmentation. And this is why the knowledge faded into myth. A society built on fear cannot tolerate a population that knows how to return to calm at will. The hidden switch was never hidden by accident. It was buried beneath distraction, urgency, and noise. Yet it has always been there, waiting, patient, responding the moment perception shifts from resistance to presence. The moment the signal changes, the body listens. And once the body listens, healing follows. By the time awareness reaches this stage, something unexpected begins to happen. The body starts responding before the mind understands why. People often report a subtle warmth spreading from the base of the skull, a gentle pressure behind the eyes, or a sensation of the spine becoming lighter, as if gravity itself has softened. These sensations were described in ancient texts as signs of alignment, not activation, because nothing new is being added. The system is simply returning to its original operating state. Thoth's writings emphasize that the nervous system is not meant to be constantly alert, but selectively responsive. Modern neuroscience mirrors this precisely. When the vagus nerve receives consistent signals of safety, it dampens excessive sympathetic output, reducing cortisol, stabilizing heart rhythm, and synchronizing brain regions that previously operated in isolation. This synchronization is what people mistake for mystical awakening. In reality, it is neurological coherence. The mind stops competing with the body. Thought slows because it no longer needs to anticipate danger. Anxiety fades, not because it is suppressed, but because its purpose has been fulfilled. What makes this stage feel profound is the shift in perception of time. Moments feel wider. Reactions feel delayed in a beneficial way. There is space between stimulus and response. This is the hallmark of a regulated nervous system, and it is where true emotional intelligence emerges. Thoth described this as standing between breaths, a state where consciousness is present without urgency. Quantum theorists now suggest that perception itself may be influenced by internal coherence, meaning that when the system is ordered, information is processed more efficiently. Healing frequency in this sense is not something you tune into. It is something you stop interfering with. The body's electromagnetic signals become less chaotic, allowing cellular communication to optimize itself. This explains why people often experience spontaneous relief from chronic tension, headaches, or digestive issues during this phase. The body is no longer bracing against imagined threats, it is finally listening to itself. This is the stage where many realize the truth. Healing was never locked behind effort. It was locked behind misunderstanding. The final realization arrives quietly, without ceremony or fireworks, and that is precisely why most people miss it. Once the nervous system stabilizes, the search ends. Not because all questions are answered, but because the compulsion to seek dissolves. Thoth referred to this as the return to the source, not a cosmic destination, but a biological one. The body becomes the anchor. Consciousness expansion stops being an abstract concept and becomes a lived state of presence. People often describe feeling more human, not more spiritual, more grounded, not elevated. This is the opposite of what modern spiritual culture promises, and that is the final twist. Awakening does not remove you from life. It returns you to it, fully regulated, fully aware, fully embodied. Neuroscience confirms that when the nervous system is no longer hijacked by threat, the prefrontal cortex regains influence, allowing for reflection instead of reaction. Decisions become less impulsive. Emotional patterns lose their grip. The vagus nerve maintains equilibrium, acting as a stabilizing force rather than a crisis responder. The Feng Fu point ceases to be a technique and becomes a reference point, a reminder that safety is not external. Anxiety relief is no longer something you chase, it is something you return to. The mind-body connection becomes obvious, undeniable, experiential. This is why Thoth warned that the knowledge should be shared carefully. A population that knows how to regulate itself cannot be ruled by fear. It cannot be easily distracted. It cannot be endlessly provoked. Calm becomes power, not dominance, but clarity. And here lies the deepest truth of the hidden switch. It was never meant to be flipped once. It is meant to be remembered again and again each time life pulls the system back into tension. Healing is not an event. It is a relationship with your own biology. When that relationship is restored, consciousness expands naturally, not upward, but inward. The signal stabilizes, the body responds, the mind quiets, and for the first time, silence no longer feels empty, it feels complete. As the understanding settles, a strange reversal takes place. What once felt hidden now feels obvious. What once felt complex now feels simple. The mind realizes that the greatest deception was never external control or lost knowledge, but the belief that healing had to come from outside the body. Thoth's final teachings did not describe new techniques or higher realms. They described trust. Trust in the intelligence of the nervous system. Trust in the body's ability to return to equilibrium when it is no longer flooded with fear signals. This is where neuroscience and ancient wisdom fully converge. The brain is not designed to dominate the body. It is designed to listen to it. When that relationship is restored, the body stops screaming through symptoms. Anxiety, once seen as an enemy, reveals itself as a messenger that no longer needs to shout. Calm becomes sustainable because it is no longer forced. The vagus nerve maintains rhythm. The mind rests without effort. Consciousness expands not because it escapes the human experience, but because it finally inhabits it fully. This is also where responsibility enters the picture. Once the hidden switch is understood, it cannot be unseen. Stress-based living becomes recognizable for what it is, a distortion, not a necessity. People begin to notice how often fear is used to motivate, manipulate, and distract. They notice how rarely stillness is encouraged. This awareness is not paranoid or conspiratorial, it is calm and observant. The regulated nervous system does not seek enemies, it seeks coherence. And coherence changes everything. Relationships shift, boundaries become clearer, emotional reactions soften. The mind no longer confuses intensity with truth. This is why Thoth's knowledge was never about domination or superiority. It was about stewardship of awareness. A person who can regulate their own internal state becomes difficult to destabilize, not rebellious, not passive, simply grounded. And that grounded presence quietly reshapes every environment it enters. In the end, the hidden switch is not a secret mechanism waiting to be unlocked by the few. It is a biological inheritance shared by all, obscured not by time, but by noise. The nervous system was never broken. It was overwhelmed. Healing was never absent, it was interrupted. When the signal of safety returns, the body remembers what to do. The mind stops chasing meaning because meaning is felt directly. The Feng Fu point, the vagus nerve, the calm mind, the quantum signal, the ancient metaphors, all of them point to the same truth from different angles. The body heals when it is allowed to feel safe. Consciousness expands when it is no longer forced to defend itself. Stillness becomes fertile. Silence becomes intelligent. This is why the ending is quiet. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to activate, nothing left to seek. The real transformation does not announce itself. It integrates. Life continues, but it feels different, less urgent, more present. The nervous system carries the memory forward, even through stress, even through difficulty. The switch does not disappear, it waits. And each time it is remembered, the body responds faster, the mind settles sooner, the signal stabilizes more easily. This is the true lost secret of Thoth, not power over reality, but harmony within it. And once that harmony is restored, the search ends, not in emptiness, but in wholeness.